Welcome to Board Ghost, a story broadcast with games as the engine.
If living is a highway, then heaven is a bus stop. Been waiting for a minute there, but has it been forever? 'Cause dying don't agree with me.
We believe you're out there, hungry for stories for shared experience. We can't see you, can't hear you, yet we will play for you. This night's offering is a continuation of our game of The Skeletons. To learn how we generate stories playing games of The Skeletons, go check out our The Skeletons Rules Primer. Skeletons is put out by Bully Pulpit Games and is designed by Jason Morningstar, the same guy who designed Fiasco, which is in works for a second edition right now. The boxed edition is what they're called, Fiasco in a Box, which may have a different name like Fiasco, but we'll see. So that's pretty exciting. Our game so far, we'll get into in a second. Before that, our humble players, myself, John Holt, with me.
Ken Breese.
And Kelsey Dionne. Hey, everybody.
The Skeletons is a game about time passing, and we have got our three real weird skeletons. We are in a northern factory with the deer, big head, and the horror. All right, so we are going to. We left. We had just dealt with a couple more intruders, had settled down for a year of relative quiet. As the power fades from us and the compulsion to go out and sort things out has gone. So, all right, that is where we're at. We're gonna get into our quiet year, and off we go.
Arise and protect the tomb, skeletal guardians.
You are awoken by a sound. There is a sound coming from the naughty or nice tomes and library.
I awake near the ponderous conveyor belts. They've shut down again for another year. They've been frozen. They're sort of near the front so that when the sleigh came in, gear could be offloaded onto these conveyor belts and then brought into more of the warehousey type section of the whole place. I look up as like frost tinkles off my frozen bones, falls to the ground, and I start shuffling over towards the library.
And as you come around the corner, you see a figure whose feet are above the ground. And they cast a glow as if like the color of reflected light off snow. And you can see the glistening tomes and rotting scrolls through this figure. And you can see its like large black boots again sort of drift just above the ground as it reaches out and tries to grasp at the tomes, and its hands merely pass through.
Begone, spirit, back to the grave with you. There's nothing for you here.
It turns, and what to your wondering eyes should appear but a sallow, sunken, bearded figure with ratty. Again, everything's just sort of like glowing soft, but you can tell it's like got a ratty, ragged beard over sunken, hollow cheeks and empty eyes that just glint like little black coals. And there's this belly that just sags, and you see that the clothes just hang these that faded, what like ever so slightly you can tell is red fur trimmed cloak or that he has draped about him just like pours off of his form like it once covered a much larger man. And his boots, they're blackened and even in the substantial form rotting. And his belt hangs, again, sort of sagging and barely holding up his pants' black, big old buckle. He turns to you and puts one finger to his nose, and it's this bony, slender finger, and smiles with crooked teeth.
I am an undead guardian.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who I am or why I'm here. I only know that I'm the first builder, but at this point, I know fear as well.
Ooh.
As I hold up my war stocking like some sort of talisman trying to ward this apparition off.
Ooh, and the horror has been attracted by the sound. It's used to going after weird little chirps and sounds, assuming it's a broken toy. So that's what attracted the horror here. And it steps into view, and it's got two paddle balls going at full speed. It says, "An adult."
The figure drifts towards you both, and its hand reaches for the boot, the war stocking,
Yeah.
and it begins to rapidly age and deteriorate as this hand passes through it.
Not my war stocking.
The war stocking.
As the war stocking is being just totally desiccated and aged by the touch, I let it go as it's just being like now grasped in both hands, and like this rictus grin is showing up on this apparition's face as the war stocking is just turning into flecks of ash as it's
like
just
metallic
yeah,
rust. and-
exactly. There's even one or two very desiccated and sinewy sugar plum corpses that tumble out of the toe of it that had been stuffed
Right.
and stuck down
and
there for
turn to,
years.
like blackened dust. before they
Exactly,
even hit the ground.
exactly. Instead, I grab onto my amulet, this spiny, tubular, tree-shaped amulet, and I hold that as it begins blinking with multicolored lights, unbeknownst to me, and the top of it begins to alight with a bright light as well.
Ooh.
Yeah, the figure as it deteriorated, the stocking had started to almost gain form and gain substance around you, and the blinking though had it reared away and back, and you just could watch as it again sort of became translucent, and whatever power it drew from whatever it sucked from the war stocking, that is gone now. And it drifts, it catches something, kind of looking past your light now. It hears, it's like something is calling to it from inside the tomb.
The whore says, "You broke the last toy." The whore has this like threadbare like fanny pack that it's got, that it stuffs toys and broken things into, and it was nylon once, and now it's just sort of this moldy, rotting thing. And it hooks a claw in the zipper, and it reaches inside and pulls out this like cube that has different colors in each little box on each side, and it's all mixed together. And it starts whirling the cube and spinning and clicking
What?
it.
What?
And as it's doing this like radiant, like black energy starts to crackle from it, and it's growing, and it says, "You broke the last toy," as it's clicking through this cube faster and faster.
The black light kind of reaches out with like inky fingers and starts to chew at this figure, who recedes as far as it can into the corner and is cowering away from it. But again, it sort of looks up with like a hunger, and it almost like a push, like pushes through this black light, and you see pieces of it being just pulled away into nothingness. And it races past you out towards the center of the tomb.
Big Head follows. Instead of going to the center of the tomb, he turns left into the treasure vault full of presents and wrapped packages, and grabs one at random before turning back towards the tomb.
So the horror is trying to lumber after this spectral creature, but it's so angered at the loss of the last toy, and it's so focused on its task that it's sort of stumbling, and it isn't able to really keep up with the speed of this intruder. It's
Yeah, and I think when you do catch up, wherever both of you are, you find it there just crouching at the little pile of gold dust. And the hands of this thing are cupping and just bringing up some of this gold dust. And you see like the hands become opaque and the fingers thicken into and to fill its white gloves. The sort of like sooty texture goes away and they're pristine and clean. And it's almost like color and shape and form are coming back into this thing as the dust loses some of its luster.
Unsure of what or who this apparition is now, sort of approaches gingerly, but offering the wrapped package that he had grabbed from the treasure vault to the apparition, saying, "Happy holidays."
The horror has seen Big Head do this once before and stops in its tracks, hoping that this creature will take the present and open it.
Yeah, the cheeks fill, and what were these cold, like flinty eyes now sparkle and twinkle, and it's now full form. Like it's not 100% substantial yet, but and its hair is still matted, and there are still tatters, and where the black energy had pulled away at it, there's still some sort of wound that's not a fleshy wound. It's something else. Silently, you see its belly quiver like a bowl full of jelly as it reaches for the gift and rears back its head and makes an O with its mouth as it must be laughing, and but no sound comes out.
Silent.
And now that the form's not like contacted with the dust and is holding this package, what begins to happen? What does this package do?
Well, as the form takes the package in hand, it can't seem to take its hands off of it, almost like it's stuck to it. And as the package begins to continue to be sort of stuck to it, shaking it around, the top of the package seems to almost like a box be sort of falling off as the apparition is being sucked like closer and closer, like towards the box.
And as the lid falls off, you see that it's full of coal, this box.
Yeah.
The horror like lifts a claw in true fear. This is one of the only things that it fears is not the toys, but the coal.
The coal.
Yeah, and the coal
Not the
begins to
coal.
leach the light and time out of this apparition. Where before what you were evoking with the cube was hints and wisps of black energy, this is that black energy substantial and
Yeah.
this is the true face of whatever antimatter or anti-time. And as the
Anti-time.
package deteriorates around the hands of this thing, it is drawn into this lump of black rock.
That's awesome.
And the last thing you both see is it almost impossibly, like how could a thing fit through a space like this, just suck into the coal, and you see its like sad, sorrowful eyes and mouth as it's drawn away into nothingness.
The horror says, "Once you're naughty, you're always naughty."
All right. Everyone answers one question if they wish. Who would like to answer a question?
What thing in this place came into being alongside you? Actually, I think that the deer and I both came into being around the same time. Something had happened to us. We lived a life before we became skeletons that I don't remember. But I know that we served a purpose in this factory that was different from what it is that we do now. But something bad happened. Like something took the factory from being like a joyful, warm memory of indistinctness to being something bad. And the magic from this place died, and then we died. And then now this is what we became. And we're here now because we have to make sure that nothing else comes back here and suffers the fate that we did. That's all I know.
I am realizing there's a connection between myself and that which was just driven away. A memory is evoking a memory of claws. And as I realize this, it also becomes clearer to me that I have actually over the years when I have been mobile, been scratching graffiti into the walls of the tomb. Though we can't really read it or see it because it's dark, maybe we know it's there. Phrases like fear the claws and claws of rending and St. Claus forsakes us.
God laughs table. The magic animating one of the skeletons, but not its compulsion to service, is beginning to fade. So which skeleton do we think should be losing some mojo?
I think it should be the horror, personally.
Yeah, because the
Okay.
toys are breaking and they're
And
being
you, and you
destroyed.
dabbled with the thing you feared a little
The
bit.
broken
Yeah.
toy collector.
I think because, right, the coal is now really the only thing left, and that's so counter to what my purpose was.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
love that you just have all these toys on you that you've been using to deadly effect or attempting to.
All right, so we're going to do one last table time on this thing, and then we've got the next set of 4. So this is going to be a century.
Ooh, wow. That's a
Whoa.
big jump.
Yeah.
So far, we've had a few months go by, and then a year, and then
years, yeah.
another year, and now 100 years go by.
Yeah. We're going to be in silence for 2 minutes and say arise, but we also are going to choose on once on the world crumbles or time devours. A tomb robber is successful. What object did they steal? Choose from among those already introduced if you're able. Adjust the map. None of the existing robbers, like, we've kind of been pretty murderous. Like,
Yep.
so no one's, I mean, unless we said, like, the apparition took
Right.
something on their way out.
True.
Like the Library of Naughty and Nice, they could have wreaked havoc there, for instance.
Right. Record has been destroyed of who was naughty or nice.
Okay, so like a whole shelf of Naughty and Nice books has just been leached of time and life and is rotted in its place. Time was stolen from our tomb.
Exactly.
All right, so we're going to be sitting in silence for a couple of minutes.
Rise and protect the tomb, skeletal guardians! We are hearing the sound of ice cracking as water and steam and light are pouring in through the front entryway. Punching through, we see this metallic digging claw that is odd red and white swirl colored, like a candy cane. And we hear, as the claw removes itself from the ice on the other side, voices going, "Oh, I think we found it. Oh, let's hear it. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Get in there. Oh, we found it." And a lot of excited squealing and talking as the hole is made larger by these sort of chunk, 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 like ice picks and ice axes. And as the way is made clear, figures start to push their way into the opening. They are small creatures. They are humanoid. They are very round. They seem to be all dressed in very like Gore-Texy like sort of winter clothes. They are taking out tricorder like objects and opening them up, blinking lights and readouts as they're waving them around the caves in front of them, trying to apparently get a read as to what's going on. They seem to be very interested in the frozen corpse that has continued to be here and become basically just a frozen ice block. So they're sort of scanning that. Seem to be also setting up lights now and some sort of base camp here, starting a generator, it's starting to be loud. There's probably about a dozen of them, and they seem to be taking readings.
The horror, slowly comes awake to the sound of desecration, and it is offended deeply by this, and it comes awake as usual with this blaze of light around its head, but I don't think anyone really notices because there's so much
Ah,
goings on and other blinking lights, and it seems like it's daylight when they show
many
up.
blinking lights.
The horror kind of comes awake in the midst of this whole
Big
to-do.
hubbub, yeah.
The horror was probably it tends to rest around the conveyor belts for some reason, maybe because things used to fall off of them, and that's what its job was to find those broken toys, and so it's kind of in the shadows of these conveyor belts, like kind of behind
like
a
underneath it,
yeah,
maybe even.
yeah, not necessarily in plain sight, you
Yeah.
know. And it's watching this, and it
So
thinks,
watching from the conveyor belts.
yeah,
Okay.
The deer, if you may be able to catch just about, like just under maybe the sound of generators, this sort of
Mm,
like clomping and sort of like hoof scuffing
Yeah.
and sort of angry like clomping about on the
Yeah.
ceiling.
They are drawn to the sound of the clomping with their instruments, their flashing technological readout instruments, their diagnostic instruments. They begin waving those towards the ceiling. And again, all of their gear is oddly festive, either candy cane colored or seem to have a lot of like bright packaging elements, like very shiny, lots of bows hanging off of the equipment. All the equipment is very overly decorated, oddly enough, also in colors of red and green and gold. And one of them is firing up. It almost looks like a bazooka or something like that, but it's in actuality a big flashlight, like this big spotlight that they're now about to put onto the ceiling to light this whole place up.
the horror does not want the place to be lit up like that. It's going to start trying to like through the shadows work its way over towards this light. Something about casting bright light in this place makes it angry. The thought of lighting this whole tomb up with unwanted attention, and it's going to slink towards that, and when given the opportunity, jump out and try to claw the life out of the people
Totally.
operating the light.
And the deer, it understands light. When it sees this beam, it's almost like, oh, you call that a knife?
Yeah,
This
right?
is a knife.
Exactly.
And-
This is a knife.
And the orb almost spraying this like hot oozing stuff. It begins to glow brighter and brighter, and this hot like radioactive
Mm-hmm.
light begins to blindingly fill the chamber.
So they're all drawn to the shining of this red glowing light
blinding
above
for
them.
those
Exactly.
with
They're
their
drawn
eyes.
to it at first, like, oh. And they don't even notice when one of their numbers torn down and rent asunder by the horror. Their interest in the bright red light quickly turns to horror as like the
Skin
X-rays.
begins to bluster.
Exactly. Their skin begins to peel off. Their eyes are being burned. Like they are screaming in pain and agony, throwing themselves to the ground. Their instruments, the more sensitive ones, are starting to melt. It seems like they have very, very advanced technology, but they don't necessarily have any type of advanced protections. They seem almost like an unarmored exploratory mission. They seem like scientists, maybe. They're screaming and rolling on the ground in pain.
The horror is going to start singing the war chant, which is Dasher, Dancer, Donner, Blitzen. And it's chanting this, and as it stomps, the bells on its arms and legs are like jingling along with this war chant, and it's picking them up and flinging them. They're tearing at their eyes because they can't see, so it's just cutting a path of destruction through these scientists. And
Yeah, the wood is actually starting to scorch in areas, just like from the contact heat, and the light begins to dim. Like it seems like it can't be so sustained, and in fact, when it comes back, it's like cracked, like blackened the skull, and it's like cracked. The orb is still there, and it just like oozes and glows, like you're looking at a coal that
like
that
it's
is
running
just
like
got
an
a little
open
wart.
sore.
The deer bucks at one of the like scorched logs, and it just falls down onto one of their like equipment pack or machines.
I mean, it crushes one of their legs underneath it as well. And like they're burned and crisp. One of them just got torn open. They're starting to smell the blood and see the viscera of their companion. The bright light was still sort of shining. One of them seems to like touch something on their belt, and it's almost like the snow globe effect appears around them, protecting them from the radiant X-ray energy.
Cutting off the like burnt gingerbread
Yeah,
smell that's filling the air.
All of these scientists seem to have pointed ears, and their boots that they're wearing seem to raise up the toes, sort of like swoop up at the ends and sort of curly Q around. They all look very dressed in a very specific manner that seems to be quite detailed.
So some of them have a force field at this point?
Just one.
Just the one. So the horror is gonna... So the result of this huge burst of energy is that the horror's nylon bag of things is like kind of starting to melt to its body. And the toys inside suffered great damage, and it plucks out the cube. The cube is starting to like spark and blaze with that black energy, and it looks like it's starting to become unstable. And the horror looks at it for a moment fondly and then throws it at that force field like a grenade. It goes flying, and when it connects, this huge flash, this like snap flash of light bursts around the room.
And it twinkles, and it's yellow and red and blue and green, and it just cycles through them really quick. As the screams of the dying and the burned are just like a cacophony here in the front entryway. The light is showing the stark shadows that are being thrown by the conveyor belts and all the assembly equipment. There's just like the smell of burnt gingerbread flesh.
There's silence, perhaps. I don't know if any of the scientists survived this, but neither did any of the horror's toys.
Yeah, no, it doesn't seem like any of the scientists have survived the onslaught.
The deer, it just kind of flies down, drifts down in this like glittering pattern, and the few like moaning, writhing, it just sort of stomps like on them and just kind of like points out a toe and
I love it. Yeah,
spikes them until there's nothing but quiet.
Everyone answers none, one or two questions.
All right. So what was your name? Hearing the horror sing the war song, he remembered that the deer was the most famous reindeer of all, Randolph.
Randolph.
Who here among the skeletons once treated you with kindness? Big Head actually used to. We both had strange tasks here. I don't remember what they were particularly, but I remember that Big Head was a friend.
I've got, what connection do you have to those you've just killed or driven away? What memory did they evoke? Just seeing like the hive of activity. The deer kind of paused for a moment. Like they weren't going to act initially until like the bright light was brought out. There was a familiarity to having these like small creatures that smelled of like gingerbread, kind of like hobbling about.
Yeah.
And being active and having this like bubbling activity. That was a familiar, constant presence. The drone of life. In fact, it was incessant. That was the sounds of life in the tomb, and that's the memory they evoke. Being lulled into sleep by the droning sounds with a full belly.
Glory fades. The skeleton loses some bones permanently. What body part is missing? Noted on the character sheet.
The burning of the nose. Yeah. Like it scorched the skull, but it just made the antlers, like it melted to slag. The
antlers?
The gold and silver bells and banding.
Yeah.
And those just dripped down onto the skull, and the antlers themselves have crumbled to dust.
Cool.
So what remains are these sort of like sharded nubbins that are glistening with gold. Almost like...
Just coated the entire skull.
Like wax strips.
Yeah, like wax. That's exactly right. So the entire skull is now like coated in gold and silver.
Right.
Like wax drippings. A century passes. Not that long.
Is that another 2 minutes or shorter now?
Choose once on the world crumbles or time devours table and adjust the map. When ready, turn off the lights. 2 minutes. All right. I'm going to choose time devours. Wood, cloth, hide, horn, and unenchanted bone all turn to powder. Note this on the map.
The stables themselves start to fall apart.
Yeah,
a lot of the structure holding the conveyors together.
I would think, the belts themselves have probably
Yeah.
Just
cracked.
like, so what's
and-
left are these metal like cylinders. and-
Exactly, yeah.
Mhm,
So it's
mhm.
just the metal cylinders, some
Tines,
under
yeah.
skeleton type stuff. Conveyor belts are gone. The presents are sort of magical, so they're all
yeah,
Yeah.
there's
still
something
here.
about them.
The books are definitely all gone at this point. All the naughty and nice books
They all
have just
have finally rotted
totally
out.
rotted
Yeah.
and been desecrated. Are gone, except maybe there's a magical one or something like that, possibly.
Yeah, like Cornelius's pick
Mm-hmm.
is now just like a head.
Yep, just
That's
the
sort
head.
of it's actually like slid to the floor along with like a pile of gold and silver little nuggets, as all of that is rotted away, and the stables themselves is just kind of collapsed down into a moldering pile.
I feel like the bag has continued to drip gold just so slowly,
There's like another tiny pile.
like a grain a day or something.
Yeah, right.
And the things like the sugar plum fairies that you adorn this
Uh-huh.
thing with, they've actually like plumped up and turned into these like spheres.
Totally.
So they're and just sort of there's this warm yellow, like golden glow from that pile of dust.
They sure are.
Arise,
Then
protect the
tomb,
tomb,
skeletal guardians.
From all the rotting that has been going on, boxes and things have been fading away, things that weren't magically enchanted. And there was actually a box that was not in the toy room. This box was in the loading area. And when the wood finally ate away around it, a glistening, metallic, almost like titanium looking body was inside. Because there were no longer anything covering it, the midnight sun that would occasionally pass overhead in the cracks in the ceiling began to slowly charge the solar panels that were all along its torso. And then one day, it jerked and sort of twitched, and then with this fluid grace, it stood up out of its box, and its eyes blinked, or its digital eyes rather, and it looked around the tomb and it said, "I'm here to serve you." And it stepped forward into the tomb and began exploring and walking around.
From beneath the moldering pile of stable like detritus, it's sort of it's not, there's nothing substantial about it, so it just sort of softly, gently clatters and actually falls from further into dust as it's unsettled, and rising out of it slowly is the deer up into the air.
This thing is starting to move around and it's saying, my, it's so dirty in here. We must clean. And its hands whirl and turn into this sort of vacuum type thing. And like, and it starts vacuuming up shards of toys and rotting little pieces of metal that somehow have made it through. And it's starting to turn and walk towards the center of this warehouse.
Yeah, Big Head feels this alien presence and starts to move through the center of the tomb, through the sarcophagus chamber, to head them off.
Yeah, and the deer just goes for it, just swoops in and kind of with one of its signature moves tries to bring its like crystal laden hooves to bear on this automaton, and it knocks the thing tumbling, and it gets up, the automaton, and has like a little dent that kind of goes pock, and the deer rises up again and is kind of lopsided as now one of its hooves is just shattered completely off.
Yes,
And it just has to adjust as it sort of drifts and tries to like right itself in the air, like it's been like it's lost a tiller.
right. The automaton is relentless, so it gets up and then starts to again take these smooth but slow steps towards the center of the room. And it says, "It's so dusty in here. My, it's so dusty. We need to clean up." And it's moving in towards the pile of gold dust in the center. The vacuum kicks up to a higher notch.
Big Head begins to grab the sticky globules off the trees, stone trees around him, and throw them at this creature's feet, hoping that they will affect the taking away of things.
And these globs, when Big Head grabs onto them, they start to tremble.
Yeah, they're like water balloons.
Yeah.
Almost, like they're that goopy and thin and liquidy.
Yeah.
And hurling them, it's tough to do that with any accuracy. And as they hit the ground, they sort of
And just leave like a
Yeah,
sticky,
the
like they will
sticky-
solidify more.
Exactly.
Too.
Yeah. There's a pretty sizable splash when they land of
Mhm.
just this tarry but clear
exactly.
liquid.
Hoping to gum up the works.
And it seems like it's starting to work after throwing a few, and this automaton just keeps trudging through without notice, but a few start to accumulate around its feet and ankle joints, and then suddenly it jerks and it can't unlock one of its ankles, and it starts to tip forward and it lands flat out. And it whirls and, and tries to recalibrate for a moment, and then you can see that it realizes it can't walk for some reason, and then it starts to army crawl through these sludge piles, slowly reaching towards the center, single-mindedly pursuing what it believes is the biggest offense to cleanliness, which is the dust.
Yeah, the deer, seeing this, flies into one of these stone tree things, these conical trees, and just hurls itself bodily against it, sets it to rocking, and it finally tips and falls and begins to roll this massive stone thing in like a big circular pattern, like a cone will.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like gumming up itself as well, because
Yeah.
it's covered in these sticky little things that kind
Yep.
of pop and make it stick
Yeah.
and slow, and then start rolling again. It's just like it's like carved from marble or some sort of massive green stone, and it it rolls, and actually rolls over, let's say, the legs of this automaton, and basically pins them, and as the thing pulls itself forward, it pulls itself in half, but continues crawling forward.
It doesn't have a lot of push power now, so it's just the clawing forward is so slow, and then the part of the effect of this tree crushing it is that it actually managed to pop and shatter some of the solar panels that were on its thighs and then on its torso. So it's crawling forward, and you hear it saying, my, it's so, and then it, my, and then ma. And then it just sort of, with hands reaching towards this gold dust, it freezes and then locks up. Seems like it ran out of batteries. That is, you guys dispatched the automaton. Everyone answers none, 1, or 2 questions.
So I have one question left, so I'll do my one last question. Who here amongst the skeletons gently led you to your death? And I'm going to say that it was the horror. We had formed sort of a kinship over broken and lost things, and that as the life and joy and timelessness of this place started to fall apart and fade, that the horror was the one to basically there's something maintaining and animating the deer still, and that was giving it pain, the fact that it was still animated while everything else around it was starting to die off. We had a kinship as both being sort of misfit, broken things, like misunderstood in our use, but then finally given purpose.
Yeah.
We had parallel paths.
I also realized something, that my character's name is Keebler, the first builder, head of all builders.
We choose once each on Glory Fades and God's Laugh. A memory that a skeleton had previously regained is false, and the truth asserts itself. Which memory and what truth? I don't know. I think the horror mistakenly remembers that ghostly creature was an enemy and is
Nice.
convinced of that. Somehow, and it might be because the horror blames that creature for the fate that befell them, whether or not it was truly its fault. Oh, well, a memory the skeleton had previously regained slips away and is lost forever.
I think that I lose conception of naughty and nice. That the books and the lists of the naughty and the nice were always very important to me. I think my character probably maintained those lists, maybe even created those books, those tomes. But as time passes and as glory fades and as God's laugh, I forget that I ever held the duality of naughty and nice. And there is no, not they're both in the same all at once.
So now you roll on the time passes table.
Ocean.
An age.
Age says choose once each on Worlds Crumble and Time Devours.
Ooh.
So you get to pick on both. And this is going to be 5 minutes.
For World's Crumble, we're going to say the great sarcophagus splits open, spilling out its contents. What was within?
A big-ass pile of golden dust has now been created on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The bag itself, the tear in it has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, so it's
Right.
finally just ripped
It's
open
just like
entirely.
this empty hanging thing now.
Yeah, now it's just empty, devoid of anything. It was like a sack, basically a sack full of ash or
Yeah.
dust or whatever.
Right.
And now all that golden dust is all over the ground.
I also think that the ossified original pine cone for the original Christmas tree falls out.
And sits on the top.
I think I like this last one. An earthquake rocks the tomb, drastically altering its shape and utility. Many things are destroyed, so how does this affect the map? It would knock all of the conveyor belts down.
Yep.
Yeah. Just litter the floor.
Yeah.
The trees have all
Everything's
tipped over,
tipped over.
shattered.
I would maybe the center, like the trees and stuff, actually, except for the one we knocked over, something about that pile of gold dust, creates a center of safety
keeps
within
everything.
that area.
And that's the only thing
Just
that
in
stands.
that area, yeah.
Like a Stonehenge in the middle of
Yeah, exactly, with like one tipped tumulus or
Yeah,
whatever.
there's this
Yeah.
huge pile of rubble here now.
I think though, like this wall here collapses and all those presents are crushed.
Yeah, I totally
Right.
agree. Crushed. Like this entire part of the tomb itself goes upon this fault line.
There's like a icy
Yeah,
fissure.
exactly.
Yeah, they
Icy
fall into
fissure.
some crevasse. Mhm.
Okay, so now we are going to spend some time in the dark.
Rise and protect the tomb, skeletal guardians.
The tomb rolls
Oh,
and
another
quakes.
earthquake.
Oh, if only it was an earthquake, but the large chunk of ice that the tomb is on floats freely through the oceans.
Oh no!
The North Pole and all the northern
Yeah.
caps having long since melted
Long
away.
since an age ago.
Age
Of
ago.
course.
Where there had been a crevasse, now water laps at basically the base of a icy cliff shelf.
Mhm.
You hear the sounds of whirring
Zzz.
like propellers, and in come these little like things. They've got 4 what could only be described as fans kind of whirring around, and they've got these like little eyes with almost like metallic lenses and glass like coats, and those eyes scan around and shine little lights down. They kind of buzz around and look all through this place, and that's the first thing you see as you awaken. And they bear the symbol of like a curved line with another like small curved line.
My lights have long since faded on my head. Now they're just these like melted discs, implanted in my skull, but they still crackle a little bit. Static. And I pull myself up out of the rubble. Like as I stand up, it's literally just like casting aside like debris and chunks of stone and all that. And I look at one of these tiny things as it flies by and swat at it, but it's too fast and it kind of zips out of reach.
Yeah, and another kind of comes up, and as that one is almost didn't notice you, the other one comes up and is sort of curiously hovering above you. Its camera trains on you, and you can see more clearly the brown shell of this thing with this orange like streak and like a little like orange sort of arrowhead on the end on this curved little arrow, and it just kind of hovers there watching you.
I had been in the sarcophagus room, and as I come to, I see that the bag is empty, dust is on the ground, though I still feel the presence of the entity we're here to protect. I just am like feeling like something has gone awry. And so I sort of lament for a second as I say, no more dashing through the snow. And I start as well swatting at these things, trying to like bring them down, basically like clap my skeletal hands. My own form is so like desiccated at this point. Like there are little particles just coming off of me as I move, whether it's like old things that used to be on me that have just like now turned to dust. My skull is blackened where the ring of silver still clings to it, but it's almost like the silver is now embedded into my skull, like it's almost like grown around the silver. The amulet is still within, but again, my rib cage seems to have like grown around it, so it's like embedded in my rib cage, and I'm just trying to swat these metallic things to bring them down.
Yeah, they kind of swarm and again like hover just out of reach watching you, and one or two you see like zip over to, and a few others follow to the center of the tomb, almost swarm excitedly around there.
And
their little camera, you hear like clicks and like lights blink on and off on their shells and carapaces, and they sort of hover and swarm around what you can only assume is the pile.
Yeah.
I struggle my way in there, like some of my bones have cracked, somehow due to the warping of the space I was in and the way I was positioned under this debris. One of my legs is actually flipped around in its socket.
Weird.
So like my walking is completely mixed up, but I struggle my way into the protected room, and the only thing the horror can think to do is to try to like throw itself down on top of the pine cone to protect it.
Yeah, as you do that, these things kind of already excitedly scatter and fly off away back out, almost ignoring the pile and zipping away from you, Big Head.
100%.
So you look out, like on the horizon.
Yeah, I'm like stumbling after them basically,
Right.
and sort of like hissing, "These are no reindeer games."
Yeah, and you see a massive brown ship.
Ooh.
It's like it's glistening hull. It's just painted brown. It's gigantic. It towers over you. You soon fall under the shadow, and metal hooks are thrown down and pull.
That's
you
right, because we're
close
like an
beside
ice
it.
flow. Yeah.
And again, it's marked with this massive orange swoop with a little sort of orange arrow at the end, little curved swoop, and little like cages are lowered, like contained cages, and out of them step these men in brown uniforms with the swooping logo on it, and they baggages like containers. They seem like well equipped.
Yes.
Kind of have these long poles. They just begin sort of securing. A few of them have like what look like some sort of heavy weapon, but it's nothing like the cork guns that you used to see around the factory floor. And they begin sort of like talking into these plastic earpieces and scanning the ground with these glasses with some sort of lights and dial and language flicking on them, and they just start making their way in this organized fashion towards the center of the tomb.
Wow, well, the horror's sort of laying in this gold dust, and it's weird because anywhere that it's laying in the dust, a fleshy, weird apparition appears where its leg is kind of buried in this dust. It actually looks like a little stocking-covered leg with a little green thing over it, as though that part of the horror was transported back in time before its death. And then anytime it lifts its limb out, that sort of fades away, like it melts away back into the bones. And just for a second, on its face, you can see that it had an elf-like, sort of human-like face with a long nose and pointed ears that fades away again like a mirage. The second it lifts its head to look at these closing in things, and it hisses at them and says, "This is not your Yuletide haul, it is ours."
The guys with the sort of long poles approach first, and you see they kind of have these like grabbers on the end, and they just kind of grab at you and begin to pull you up out of the pile. Like 3 or 4 of them get you on these poles, and a similar set of them start to surround you, Big Head.
The only thing I've left is to rip off the amulet that I have and use it almost like a upside down, like dagger or bludgeon as I throw myself at them, trying to bludgeon them with my amulet.
Yeah, and they kind of swat you back. You definitely have a few like on the ropes, but their numbers. They pull in more, like they call in reinforcements and kind of hold you at bay as one steps forward towards the pile as you're being held above and says, "Lord Bezos, we've found it. Confirmation on the package." And another cage is lowered, and out steps this man in like a brown uniform that like glistens with metals, and he wears this hat. It's almost like a cube of brown fabric, and it has sort of flaps. Like honestly, it's like a stylized box,
Yeah.
or something. And
Yeah.
again, it's got the orange swoop with the little arrow on it. And he kind of steps forward. He's got these pantaloons, and he just marches right through. He kind of throws like a curious look at Big Head being held at bay, being fought off, and at the horror. And he reaches this pile and puts his hands together and goes, "Oh, finally, I found it."
I throw my amulet at him.
Okay. So,
Ah!
yeah, you hurl the amulet. One of the brown-clad soldiers, the one who had called in, like, "That we've got it, sir," jumps in front of it and takes
Fear
the
the
bullet.
claws!
He takes the bullet,
claws.
and it pierces him, this thing, and he
Mhm.
falls at the feet of this man with medals, and who looks down at him, goes, you're one of my most loyal." He sort of closes the man's eyes as he passes out of this realm, but he turns. His eyes are on the prize. He turns and reaches for the ossified pine cone, and as he draws it
well,
out,
you're over. You're
you're
protecting
like,
it, right?
you're
Well, I've
being
been
held
pulled
above.
Oh,
up.
it
you're
by the
pulled up now.
poles.
Oh
Yeah.
no!
He takes it in hand and smiles, and his cheeks begin to get rosy, and his stature, like he actually grows, to a height
How
above
much
his own
does
man.
his heart grow, though?
Oh, well, he kind of throws this thing up in the air and goes, "I, Jeffrey Bezos, the 16th Legion of the Bezos family, leader of the Amazonians. I have achieved immortality." And the gold
All gifts are now my gifts.
the gold dust filters around him and
That is
explodes
so
out.
funny.
And as it explodes out, what energies maintained you and the tomb gray,
Yep.
and
And
things begin to
recede.
fall in disrepair, and soon, in fact, it's like turns to dust but also fades, so that they're just standing on a block of ice next to this big brown Amazonian boat.
My last words are, "Every day will be Black Friday."
You guys are
We've done pretty well.
cast away into the nothingness. So like we're all sort of
Yep.
we are memories again.
Mhm.
As our ice flow sinks.
As they scavenge it for ice cubes for their drinks,
Yep.
to send bags of ice same day.
Mm-hmm.
Same day.
bags of ice.
I kind of laid out that ending, so I'll say a truth about the tomb or the world, that
Yes.
this dust was belief and joy, and it was the thing that sustained the beings of this place. Those things were compromised and lost for a time, but have they truly been found?
My character was definitely like the right-hand elf of who was buried here, who was obviously Santa Claus. Being the first builder, I built a lot of the toys that were here. This used to be a toy building workshop. The horror would like collect the broken toys. Obviously, the reindeer, the deer, was the leader of the pack for delivering the toys, and me and my people made the toys. So I was given a place of honor because of that. And I think that I was always kind to the horror because though the horror was a broken toy collector, I was a toy fixer or toy repairer. So I would repair those toys. And maybe I even repaired the horror from time to time. Who knows?
Yeah. The horror probably had like the lowliest station, but yet one of the most important. It was sort of the workshop form of the janitor, where
Right.
the
Right.
toys that couldn't make the cut, the horror would take and treasure and make sure those toys still had a purpose. To the point that he started to perhaps turn them into combined things and make new purposes for them. Yes, and when the true spirit of Christmas was killed by Black Friday, that was what actually brought about the cataclysm.
Yeah, and I was kind of playing that Randolph was like his story kind of lived, and that
Yes.
sustained him,
Yes,
which was
his legend.
which was like kind of painful too,
Yeah.
because it was sustaining him beyond some of the others. With that, our story ends. We will return with a new tale to spin and dare to entertain. I was one of your players, John Holt. You can find me on Twitter at Lord Joho and on Instagram at board_ghost. Ken, where can people find you?
Hey, Board Ghosts, find me, Ken Breese, on Twitter at Berlingsbeard, Berlings. I am a for-hire dungeon master in the New York City area and an RPG content creator. Hire me to run your games.
And I'm Kelsey Dionne. You can find me on the web at thearcanelibrary.com. And if you want to check out a book I just launched, it's called The Monstrous Lexicon for 5th edition D&D. It's on Amazon.com.
All right.
Nice.
So to learn more about Kelsey's book and the engine and stories and us other players, go check out boardghost.com. You can attempt to pierce the veil and contact us at BoardGhostWorld on Twitter. You can also contact us via boardghost.com. There's a contact page there. You can subscribe on iTunes, your favorite listening portal. Again, if you are on iTunes, take a moment to rate or review the show so that we can kind of get out there a little more, so that people can learn more about the show and in turn about the games that we're playing and get more of these games played. If you're around the holidays and you're traveling, make people listen. You've got a captive audience if you're on a road trip, if you're in holiday traffic. If you are out there and you're interested in games, or you know someone who's interested in games, share the show so that they can kind of learn more about some of these fun games that we play, because they're really how we get going, how we do stuff. So we're also on Facebook at facebook.com/boardghost, where you can, if that's another way that you like to follow stuff, you can check us out. And we'd like to thank Pat Couples for our theme song and interlude music. You can find more about him at patcouples.tumblr.com or on his band's website, hotelsandhighways.com. If you're not alone in the void, share our stories. The more they are consumed, the truer they become.
Dying don't agree with me, no. Oh.